The Brave Tin Soldier. Once upon a time, a little boy was given a birthday present of a set of 25 tin soldiers. All the soldiers had shiny red uniforms and gleaming tin muskets. However, one of the soldiers stood out from the rest because he had only one leg. In the same nursery there were many other toys. There were wax puppets and jack-in-the-boxes. There were playing cards and porcelain dolls. There were coloured pencils and bouncing balls. There also lived a beautiful dancing ballerina doll, who stood at the entrance to a cardboard castle which had a small mirror for a lake in front of it. She balanced herself on one leg so well that the tin soldier thought that she had only one leg. She wore a blue dress with a scarf. The scarf had a tinsel rose pinned on it in the centre. The tin soldier admired the ballerina from a distance and soon fell in love with her. "But she is so beautiful, and she lives in a beautiful castle. She will not like me at all," thought the poor tin soldier, and felt very sad. A goblin, who also lived in the same nursery, did not like the tin soldier at all. He was jealous of the tin soldier whenever the ballerina smiled at him. The ballerina really liked the one-legged tin soldier in his smart red uniform. One day, the goblin warned the tin soldier, "You better stay away from the ballerina. She is mine. I am warning you." But the tin soldier loved the ballerina so much that he just couldn't stop admiring her. One day, the puppets were playing together and the ballerina was dancing prettily. It was raining heavily outside. The tin soldier was standing on the windowsill watching the dancing doll. The window was open. The angry goblin crept behind the tin soldier and pushed him out of the window. Two boys who were passing by found him on the street and floated him down a gutter in a paper boat. The little tin soldier flowed away in the water, into the drain nearby. He was heartbroken because he feared he would never see his ballerina ever again. He saw a huge rat, but the tin soldier was brave, and holding on to his musket, he floated away just in time and escaped. In the dark drain, the poor one-legged tin soldier had to fight many rats. The drain led into a canal, where the water swirled fiercely, and here the little paper boat was torn. A fish saw the tin soldier and swallowed him. He lay inside the fish for 3 days in the dark. The tin soldier thought that he would die inside the fish. But one day, a fisherman caught the fish and sold it in the market. A lady bought the fish from the market. Now, this lady happened to be the little boy's mother. A little later, the fish was being prepared for dinner in their kitchen. When the cook cut the fish, she found the tin soldier. Exclaiming in wonder, she called the boy and gave him the tin soldier. The tin soldier was very happy to be back in the same house with the same toys. He saw his beautiful ballerina dancing at the end of the table, while he stood at the other end. The Little Match Girl. It was so terribly cold. Snow was falling, and it was almost dark. Evening came on, the last evening of the year. In the cold and gloom, a poor little girl, bareheaded and barefoot, was walking through the streets. Of course, when she had left her house, she'd had slippers on, but what good had they been? And so the little girl walked on her naked feet, which were quite red and blue with the cold. She carried several packages of matches, and she held a box of them in her hand. No one had brought any from her all day long, and no one had given her a penny. Shivering with cold and hunger, she crept along, a picture of misery, poor little girl. The snowflakes fell on her long fair hair, which hung in pretty curls over her neck. In all the windows lights were shining, and there was a wonderful smell of roast goose, for it was New Year's Eve. Yes, she thought of that. In a corner formed by two houses, one of which projected farther out into the street than the other, she sat down and drew up her little feet under her. She was getting colder and colder, but did not dare to go home, for she had sold no matches, nor earned a single penny, and her father would surely beat her. Her hands were almost dead with cold. Oh, how much one little match might warm her! If she could only take one from the box and rub it against the wall and warm her hands. She drew one out. It made a warm, bright flame like a little candle as she held her hands over it, but it gave a strange light. It really seemed to the little girl as if she was sitting before a great iron stove with shining brass knobs and a brass cover. How wonderfully the fire burned! How comfortable it was! The youngster stretched out her feet to warm them too. Then the little flame went out, the stove vanished, and she had only the remains of the burnt match in her hand. She struck another match against the wall. It burned brightly, and when the light fell upon the wall it became transparent, like a thin veil, and she could see through it into a room. On the table a snow-white cloth was spread, and on it stood a shining dinner service. The roast goose steamed gloriously, stuffed with apples and prunes. And what was still better, the goose jumped down from the dish and waddled along the floor with a knife and fork in its breast, right over to the little girl. Then the match went out, and she could only see the thick, cold wall. She lit another match. Then she was sitting under the most beautiful Christmas tree. It was much larger and much more beautiful than the one she had seen last Christmas through the glass door at the rich merchant's home. Thousands of candles burned on the green branches, and coloured pictures like those in the print shops looked down at her. The little girl reached both her hands towards them. Then the match went out, but the Christmas lights mounted higher. She saw them now as bright as stars in the sky. One of them fell down, forming a long line of fire. Now someone is dying, thought the little girl, for her old grandmother, the only person who had ever loved her, and who was now dead, had told her that, when a star fell down, a soul went up to God. She rubbed another match against the wall. It became bright again, and in the glow the old grandmother stood clear and shining, kind and lovely. "Grandmother!" cried the child. "Oh, take me with you. I know you will disappear once the match has burnt out. You will vanish like the warm stove, the wonderful roast goose, and the beautiful big Christmas tree." And she quickly struck the whole bundle of matches, for she wished to keep her grandmother with her. And the matches burnt with such a glow that it became brighter than daylight. Grandmother had never been so grand and beautiful. She took the little girl in her arms, and both of them flew in brightness and joy above the earth, very, very high. And up there was neither cold, nor hunger, nor fear. They were with God. But in the corner, leaning against the wall, sat the little girl, with red cheeks and smiling mouth, frozen to death on the last evening of the old year. The New Year's sun rose upon a little pathetic figure. The child sat there, stiff and cold, holding the matches, of which one bundle was almost burned. She wanted to warm herself, the people said. No one imagined what beautiful things she had seen, and how happily she had gone with her old grandmother into the bright new year. The Ugly Duckling. Once upon a time, there was a mother duck that hatched eggs in her basket. 6 of them were the same, but one of them stood out from the others. The eggs began to crack, and out popped tiny, fluffy ducklings. All the eggs had hatched, except for one, which was larger than the rest. When the last one finally hatched, the last duckling looked very different from the others. The little duckling was very sad, because he thought he was the ugliest amongst all his brothers and sisters. They would not play with him and teased the poor ugly duckling. One day he saw his reflection in the water and cried, "Nobody likes me, I'm so ugly." He decided to leave home and went far away into the woods. Deep in the forest he saw a cottage in which there lived an old woman, her dog, and her cat. The duckling stayed with them for some time, but he was unhappy there and soon left. When winter set in, the poor duckling almost froze to death. A peasant took him home to his wife and children. The poor duckling was terrified of the children and escaped. The ugly duckling spent the winter in a marshy pond. Finally, spring arrived. One day, the duckling saw a beautiful swan swimming in the pond and fell in love with her. But then he remembered how everyone made fun of him, and he bent his head down in shame. When he saw his own reflection in the water, he was astonished. He was no longer an ugly duckling, but a handsome young swan. Now he knew why he had looked so different from his brothers and sisters. "They were ducklings, but I was a baby swan," he said to himself. He married the beautiful swan and lived happily ever after.
Thumbelina. Once upon a time, there was a kind woman who had no children. She longed for a baby and would often say, "How I wish I had a baby girl, even a tiny little one." A beautiful fairy heard her wish one day and gave her a little seed to plant in a flower pot. When the seed bloomed into a flower, the woman saw a tiny, beautiful girl inside, no bigger than her thumb, so the woman decided to call her Thumbelina. She was so small that she had a walnut shell for a bed and used flower petals as a blanket. Then an ugly toad fell in love with Thumbelina. One night when she was sleeping, he carried her off to his lily pad in a pond. Thumbelina was very unhappy, and she ran away from the toad. Tired from running, she found refuge in the house of Lady Mouse, but her happiness was short-breathed. The Lady Mouse wanted Thumbelina to marry her son. One day, she tried to run away. As before, a swallow was passing by and saw how sad she looked, and said, "Come south with me to warmer lands." Young Thumbelina flew away on the swallow's back. They flew across the mountains and seas and came to a land of sunshine. When Thumbelina asked the swallow about beautiful land, the bird answered, "This is my home. You can choose the loveliest and biggest flower to live in." When Thumbelina stepped inside a flower she chose, underneath its petals, she found a handsome boy fairy, and he was as tiny as her. He was the son of the king of flowers, and he fell in love with Thumbelina. He asked her to marry him, so Thumbelina became queen of the flowers, and the two of them lived happily ever after. The